Hi, welcome to Fish on Fridays. I'm Al McCauley. Today I want to talk about one of the most beloved saints of all time, and that is St. Nicholas, whose feast day we remember every year on December 6th. And St. Nicholas, of course, is the forerunner for our modern secular understanding of Santa Claus. And so I think it's important to look at this man historically and the reality of him so that we can kind of win back, if you will, some of the secular overtaking of the holiday of Christmas. I fear that someday we may be reducing Christmas just to Santa Claus and forgetting the real meaning of it. But Santa Claus is rooted, of course, in St. Nicholas. And so I want to talk about that man. He was born right around the year 270. We don't know the exact year, in southern Turkey. And I think I'm pronouncing the city right. It's called Patara in the southern coast of Turkey, which is right on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. And he eventually would become the bishop of a city to the east of that in Turkey called Myra. So he was a real guy. He was a real bishop in the time toward the end of the third century, at a time of great persecution for Christianity. In fact, we know that he was imprisoned during the reign of Diocletian. Now, he was the Roman emperor until about 280, 285, till about 304, 305. So it's during that reign that we remember what's called the Great Persecution, because it was so violent and so bloody. The Diocletian's reign was so anti-Christian that many people suffered. Nicholas is what we would call a confessor. Now, a confessor is one step removed from martyr. A martyr is someone who is killed for their faith. A confessor is someone who is punished for their faith, but not killed. So they may be beaten, they may be imprisoned, that kind of thing. And we do know that Nicholas, both of those things happened to him. He was both beaten and imprisoned for a better part of a decade, in fact, as a Christian leader. And in early part of the 300s, 304, 305, when Diocletian abdicates or gives up his throne, he's going to be released. And that's going to be, that being in jail, suffering for his faith, is going to be instrumental later on in his life. But Nicholas lived as somebody who had a deep concern and care for others. And he was somebody who had some means, access to means, if not himself. In other words, he knew influential people and wealthy people if he himself didn't have those funds or that influence. Because we hear stories that have come down to us as legends, but I would suggest that there's truth in them, that all legends tell us something. They reveal some truth. And in this case, I think they tell us a lot about St. Nicholas. Stories like a man that he had heard of who had 3 daughters who were going to be sold into prostitution because this man was indebted to somebody. And he could do nothing by law at the time. He could do nothing to prevent this. And so he was very distraught and he prayed for help. Nicholas knew of this. And so Nicholas would sneak in up the side of the house and through the window would drop in a bag of gold so that the man could pay his debt and not have to sell have his girls be taken into prostitution. This is where, by the way, we get the idea of Santa Claus bringing us gifts. But instead of dropping them down the chimney, Nicholas would just drop them through the window. But we hear stories like this. We hear stories. He's often called Nicholas the Wonder Worker because we hear these stories that by today's sensibilities, we think, well, there's no way that could happen. But I would suggest that everything about our Christian faith is supernatural. From virgin birth to resurrection from the dead, all supernatural, and all the miracles and stuff in between. And so I firmly believe that these miracles we attribute to saints are really, they're true, and there's truth to them. And so we oftentimes see St. Nicholas pictured with 3 little kids. Sometimes they're in a barrel or it looks like a wooden bucket of sorts. There's a story about a man who kidnapped and butchered 3 little children. And this was made news, obviously, as you can imagine. And Nicholas was able to understand where they were, to get this idea of where they were kept, and found out that they were butchered and put into a barrel where they were pickled in pickling brine. And he prayed over the barrel, and not only did the body parts come together, all 3 kids were resuscitated and brought back to life. And so, again, here's one of the connections that we see, St. Nicholas and Santa Claus with children, the connection to loving of children and caring for kids. This is all part of it. It's all steeped in that tradition about this man. Because he lived on the coast of the Mediterranean, he was invoked by sailors who claimed that he would bilocate. He would be at his church, he would be helping his flock, but they were sailors who in the middle of a storm would cry out for his help, and he would appear to them, and he, through the intercession of his intercession, through the grace of God, were able to calm the storms or help the boat make its safe passage. Even Christopher Columbus in the 16th century prayed for the intercession of St. Nicholas when, Columbus made 4 journeys to what we call the New World, and he felt so indebted to the guidance, if you will, the spiritual guidance and help from Nicholas, that when he landed in what he called Hispaniola, today we call it Haiti, the first place he landed, he called the port of St. Nicholas, in tribute to him. So he's invoked by sailors as somebody who was helping them to get to shore, to get to their appointed course. Many other stories I could tell you. I could spend a lot of time telling you stories, but you get a gist of it. The gist of it is this was a man who cared about others, who really wanted to bring God's grace to others, was a conduit of God's grace to others. And so he's a remarkable man. And as I said, we have this jolly old Saint Nick that we call today, Santa Claus today, goes back to St. Nicholas. But I do want to tell you a story that tells you about how he wasn't always so jolly. It's a great story about the Council of Nicaea. In 325, the Emperor Constantine is going to call together all of the Christian leaders around the world to the first ecumenical or worldwide council. And there are over 300 people there, men, and they're all clerics, and they're meeting in Nicaea, which is a suburb of Constantinople. Today we call it Istanbul. And they're going to hash out what we believe about Christ, the nature of Jesus. Is he human? Is he divine? Is he both? That kind of thing. And in the presence of these learned men, there is a heretic that's invited, a guy named Arius, who's going to suggest that Jesus does not have 2 natures, that he's not really God, that he's only human. And Nicholas, who sat in jail and who was beaten for his faith, grew so tired of listening to Arius and so frustrated that he couldn't believe what he was hearing, that he got up, he walked up to Arius and he slugged him. Now, the record isn't clear. Did he punch him or did he slap him? Don't know. But we do have this event chronicled in more than one piece of art of jolly old St. Nicholas beating the heck out of somebody who was a heretic. So I guess you have to duck if you're a heretic around St. Nicholas. Gives you a different meaning when you have your kids sit on Santa's lap for those annual Christmas pictures. To think about Santa Claus as somebody who's going to, deck somebody because they don't believe in the dual nature of Christ, that he is both, in fact, human and divine. One last story I want to talk to you about with St. Nicholas is that when he died, he and buried, people broke into his grave from his crypt, and they stole his bones, and they took them back to Italy, to a city on the southeastern part of Italy called Bari, B-A-R-I, Bari, Italy. And that's where his remains are to this day. They did this because they knew that if they had the bones of St. Nicholas, it would bring in money, because people would flock from around Christendom to want to venerate this great saint and his memory, and so they would pay money. And so his remains still exist at Bari, Italy today. You can go to a basilica that's named after him. And if you look up at the altar in the sanctuary, there's looks like a crawl space that you can actually go in and you can see where his remains are, and you can pay your respects. In fact, Pope John Paul II, when he was Pope, traveled to Bari, Italy, and he did just that. He crawled under the altar and he venerated or prayed with or to the St. Nicholas for his intercession. Now, what's fascinating is in the year 2004, scientists were granted permission to look at the remains, the skeletal remains of Nicholas. And what they were able to determine was that he died when he was right around age 60, which was pretty long for that time, pretty old. He was about 60 years old. They reasoned that he was probably about 5'6", and they reckoned that he had a broken nose. And again, this probably comes from the beatings he took when he was in prison under the reign of Diocletian. But they came up with a composite portrait of what he would have looked like, given where he lived and his lineage and whatnot. And so you can see what the real St. Nicholas might have looked like. Gives you a glimpse again into the reality of maybe Santa Claus a little bit. But I just think that's fascinating. Again, down through the ages, we've had great artists who have depicted Santa Claus, and they've always taken this idea of St. Nicholas, and they've changed it. Everyone from Clement C. Moore, who wrote "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." You've got Thomas Nast in the 1880s, a famous political cartoonist who depicted what we thought of St. Nicholas and Santa Claus for a long time. Norman Rockwell has taken as many stabs at this in art in terms of depicting Santa Claus. So is Haddon Sundblom. So Haddon Sundblom is the artist who was hired by Coca-Cola to produce what we call the Coca-Cola Santa Claus. And I would suggest in our modern understanding, that's probably the most widely recognized version of Santa Claus today. Now, how much does that look like the St. Nicholas that the scientists have determined from his remains? Not much. But there are some overlaps, as I've mentioned all along here. The love of kids, the idea of giving to the other without cost and without thinking of payback. And this is why Santa Claus comes every year. We're reminded, when Santa gives, this is the lesson, when Santa gives without any expectation of repayment, we're reminded of that lesson that, peace on earth, goodwill to all people will come alive, because that's what it's all about. We're reminded of the freedoms of our faith, that we are able to worship in this country. And so while it's okay, I suppose, to remember Santa Claus, it's more important to remember the lesson of St. Nicholas, to give and to not count the cost, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. I hope this has been helpful. I hope this has been interesting. If you know someone named Nicholas, maybe you want to share it with them. Or feel free to share it with anybody, for that matter. I'd love that when that happens. Love that you tune in every Friday for Fish on Fridays. Hope you'll continue to do so. It would be great if you subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook. Until next time, be good to each other, and God bless.